Welcome to Canada's podcast.
Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast. Today on Calgary's podcast, my guest is Carolyn Berglund, who is principal of Talk Talk in Calgary. Thanks, Carolyn, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let me just ask you a little bit about what you do. What is Talk Talk?
Yeah, Talk Talk is a company that I started about 15, 16 years ago and actually stopped the business for a little bit. So I went back into the big consulting houses for about a decade. And then 3 years ago, actually this month, was in a position to resurrect it. So what we do at Talk Talk is we play in a number of different spaces. One is we work in the leadership space. We work in team development. We also do executive coaching, and we help others be better public speakers.
And how did you get into this? How did this all start?
It's a good question. If I go back to my career coming out of university, I worked for a little organization by the name of Kellogg's. So Snap, Crackle, and Pop. I actually spent 10 years in consumer packaged goods sales. But when I was at Kellogg's, a gentleman had suggested, we had lunch, one of my colleagues, that I take up a program called Dale Carnegie. So you might be familiar with How to Win Friends and Influence People. So I ended up taking that program as a participant, and then became what is called the graduated assistant, and then ended up instructing that program for a couple of years. And so kind of got a portal into facilitating and presenting in front of groups. And so just continued alongside my career to develop that facilitation muscle, if you will. And it's just something that I have adored.
What was having worked in both areas for somebody and for yourself? What was the biggest transition for you to go on your own and do it on your own?
Yeah, so Mario, I spent half of my career working for somebody else in various iterations. Like I mentioned, Kellogg's, other consumer packaged goods organizations, big consulting firms, and then I had my own company. And I think the biggest transition and why I like this space, the entrepreneurial space, is because you're afforded the luxury of being creative.
Yeah.
So when you're under the tutelage of a big organization, they kind of dictate how you do things and why you do things. And now I get to be super creative in terms of the content that I'm creating for the teams in which I work, the people that I work with.
Mm-hmm. What was your biggest challenge of doing this?
Another good question. I would say just having the confidence in oneself to say that I can make that transition. I believe in myself enough to do this, that I could get the client work, and just making that leap and taking that risk, because it is a risk, right? When you make that transition from the corporate world to yourself.
Yeah. Now, if you had some people like that you were mentoring, say, for instance, and they were asking you questions about being an entrepreneur, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
I would say if someone's considering going into having their own organization, whether it's professional services like what I offer, or they have a widget or whatever it is, it's funny. The older I get, the more I think, just go for it. I know that sounds kind of Pollyanna a little bit, but I think life is really short. And if you have a dream, I think part of our purpose in life is to pursue that dream, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And so obviously there's all kinds of other implications, financial implications. Can you do it? All of that. But I would say do it or plan for it. So even if you're in an organization, carve out time each and every day to look at your dream and see if you can make that a reality. So make a plan, believe in yourself, take the risk.
Mm-hmm. We all know those stories, a lot of the famous stories out there where people just, kept going at it, right? Kept going at it, and now phenomenal success, right? I guess it's easy, especially when you're starting something new. It's hard, right? It's hard,
And
but easy to just stop, right? And say, no, I can't
Well,
do this anymore.
and you might, I won't say fail, but I did this twice. So the first time I did it,
Yeah.
quite candidly, and to offer, I was going through a divorce and had a little kid. And in the consulting profession, you have really good months, you have some not so good months. And so I needed a kind of a steadier kind of income stream. So went and parked that for a little bit such that I could resurrect it some 3 years ago. So even if it doesn't work the first time, if it still continues to be your dream,
Yeah.
continue to pursue it.
Yeah. What do you like about, I guess, doing business here in Calgary and in the province?
Oh, well, I've been here 23 years. I was born in Winnipeg, which,
Ah.
as you talk to people in the community, a lot of people are from Winnipeg.
Oh, yeah.
A lot. But this is home now, having been here 23 years. There's a variety of industries. I think the network is really strong. I work in Calgary for sure, but I also work outside of Calgary. In fact, a lot of my work, I'm on an aircraft quite a bit into Toronto, Montreal. But yeah, I think the clients that I have in Calgary have been terrific in terms of just learning, for example, oil and gas, or that vertical. So it's a great community of, I think, entrepreneurs and industries for
Yeah.
sure.
Do you think, you're in the area of coaching, right? And, this isn't something 20 years ago you would have thought of, or that is prevalent out there in the business world. What's changed over the years like that now? So many executives seem to have coaches, right? What's changed over that time?
Well, coaching is necessarily new. Like even with the Dale Carnegie program that I was telling you,
Yeah.
even though it's a workshop, I think there's coaching opportunities there. I think even coaches need coaches. I have a coach. So I think it's a safe place to land to talk about issues that might be happening in your universe, and having someone to kind of just talk about how do I get out of that? What do you think? It's an impartial place to have a conversation. And so for those that don't have coaches, I would encourage everybody to get a coach, just because it's a great place to set objectives and be held accountable as well to those
Yeah.
objectives in which you're setting.
Now, in terms of the coaching, what do you find? I guess, is there anything that is in particular that is a common thread throughout a lot of stuff that people aren't doing and need to do?
Yeah, a lot of the people that I coach come to me because there's some kind of conflict going on. So I don't know, Mario, how conflict became a dirty word. I don't think it's a bad thing. I
Yeah.
actually think healthy and passionate debate is part of working with other people. So thematically, I think what we work on, again, thematically, is building trusting relationships with those that we work with, such that we can go into that passionate conflict. We can have commitment, accountability, and results. I'm playing off of what they call Lencioni's model. The topic of psychological safety is really, really hot right now. It's not a new term, but it seems to have got a resurrection, if you will, which is it's just creating an environment of rewarded vulnerability. And I'm borrowing that from Timothy Clark. So creating an environment where you can kind of show up and be who you are, right? So often, a lot of us think that we've got to put on some kind of weird mask when we go to the office. And what I work with people is saying, no, let's see if we can get you to show up to be authentically who you are. So if you think of, the iceberg example, and there's a water line. Above the waterline is that mask that we're presenting to one another. And if we can lower that waterline and show each other vulnerably who we are, I think we become better human beings. So we all have a story, I like to say.
Yeah.
Some of us have kids that are special needs. Some of us have parents that are in palliative care. Some of us are dealing with illness. And
Yeah.
if we can look at each other as human beings having a human experience, then and the humanness of it all, then we can hopefully treat each other with kindness. And at the core of what I do, Mario, that's what I do, is teach others how to be kind to one another, such that we can work with each other in a safe and trusting environment.
Now, the name of your company, tell me the story there, like, and how that came about.
Well, this is going to age me. There was a band in 1981.
Oh,
Talk.
really?
And it's a play on that. So there's the song, It's My Life. They did a bunch of different really cool songs, but I've always just liked the pattern of repetition of words. So that's where it came from.
And speaking of words, I'm looking at your the background screen. Where's that from? And
So that's an interesting story. So it's not wallpaper; it's a mural. So there's these things that you have to stick on the wall, which there might have been some profanity as we're trying to put it up and trying to align the words. This is the number one talk I think that ever existed, which is from my favorite novel called To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus Finch defends Tom Robinson. And it's so profound and meaningful to me that I wanted to showcase it in a more visible way.
Yeah.
And it's a great conversation starter because people generally ask.
What was your attraction to that book? What did you like about that book?
Well, so I wrote a book called 365 Must-Know Talks of All Times, some over a decade ago. And just to give you some background, I decided to blog every day for a year, so 365 entries. And I would look at a talk, whether it be Steve Jobs to Martin Luther King Jr., and try to answer the question, like, what makes a good talk versus a superb one? So I'd offer an analysis and a tip. And as I was undergoing that exercise, I got to this talk. And I thought, this is a talk that embodies all of the things that I was exploring. So I kind of put myself in my own little presentation skills university by doing that activity, threw it into a book. But this talk had purpose, it had story, it had emotion and excited curiosity. And I just think it's powerful. Words mean something, and you can impact other people by the words in which you say. And so whether you read the book or watch the Gregory Peck version of the movie, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage, anybody that's listening to this to go ahead and listen to that particular speech.
Just as an aside and a personal note, my best friend, I grew up in Ottawa. My best friend from childhood all the way through high school and even into university became an English teacher, and favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird, and that he taught all the time, every year. And he always tried to get in touch with the author, Harper Lee, I think was his name, right?
Yes.
And she's a recluse, kind of like a J.D. Salinger type. So a recluse. But one day, lo and behold, years ago, he received a letter from her, and he couldn't believe it. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Yeah, he was just floored. He received a letter from her. I think he tried a number.
What did it say?
I can't remember like what it was about, but and he was just reaching out to say hi and how much he enjoyed the book, and I think it was just one of those things. Thank you very much for your interest. All that type of stuff. But yeah,
I'll tell you how committed I am to that book. My son's name is Atticus.
Oh my!
So I'm committed. I actually thought was having a girl, and the name picked was going to be Scout, which is another character in the book. Yeah. So there you go. I was committed.
Oh, interesting. So how difficult, I'm a writer, and so I write every day, but, writing is not an easy thing for a lot of people. And I'm just thinking, like, for yourself, like 365 every day, how difficult was that?
Well, I don't claim to be any kind of like Tolstoy here. I wouldn't call myself a brilliant writer, but I'm a conversational writer. And I think the practice of writing every day, and I would love to hear your opinion, like the more you write, I think the better you get.
Yeah.
And that was my experience, is that, and then I fell in love with it. I had written at that point couple of short stories, a couple, I'd written a novel, but this was a way for me to learn. And I'm a big fan of a term called that I learned a couple of years ago, which is autodidact, which is an insatiable appetite to learn, like just for the sake of it, not because I want to get a PhD or you need more letters behind my name, just because you're curious. And so that project of writing 365 days was just an exercise of learning. Like, what is it that makes a great presentation?
So when you're dealing with these individuals that you're coaching, how is it difficult? I don't know how to phrase this, but is it difficult to deal with like the top end of a company as opposed to the ones down below who are kind of climbing the ladder type thing, right? But because the top executives, maybe some of them think, there's a reason I'm here because I know it all, right? Type thing.
Yeah, so I work with all levels of an organization, from CEOs to managers to supervisors to union, non-union. So the CEOs that come to me for, let's say, public speaking expertise, they've been awarded that role because they've been quite technically good at running the company. And then they get there and go, oh, wait, I don't know actually how to run a town hall. I haven't learned that skill, right? So it's interesting. I'm working with a CEO right now, and we're working on public speaking, and he sent me his PowerPoint deck, and he was quite proud of it. And I said, well, I don't care. Like, the content needs to be there, but what we're going to focus our energies on is how are you going to deliver this? That's the focus of our efforts. Is what's going to be our body language? How are we going to tell a story? How are we going to incite some emotion and curiosity? So to go back to your question though, I think each level in a leadership organization has different challenges, right? So it's that person going from individual contributor, I'm an employee, now I'm going to make that switch into becoming a leader. Well, there's a whole slew of things that happen. What exercises do I need to pick up? What do I need to let go? Oftentimes people don't let go, and they just keep on being that working manager with that to-do list. So at each one of those turns up through to the CEO suite, there's various challenges that we work with, but it's difficult to say that there's a theme at any level because everybody's so different. Everybody's got different personalities and desires, and
Who are some of the top speakers that you enjoy listening to?
Well, I'm a fan. I kind of start each of my days, even now, watching a TED Talk. I love TED. And there are so many that I think are famous. So like the Ken Robinson's out there that he talks about creativity in schools, which I think is a TED Talk that's been downloaded the most. I think that's a brilliant one. But there are other ones that I think are quite interesting and less well known. So there's a poet by the name of John Reeves that I like. He talks about the pattern of 4 o'clock in the morning. He has a beautiful cadence in how he talks. There's a fellow by the name of Stephen Dunye who talks about making small changes in your life, and that at the end of the year or 5 years, then all of a sudden you've really created massive change. An example in his talk, he would walk to work every day and listen to music. And one day he said, well, I really wanted to learn a new language. What if I replaced that activity with learning a new language? So he started listening on those walks to how to learn German. So at the end of the year of doing that, he decided to go to Germany. He told nobody that he was doing this, by the way, and enrolled in some immersive course of speaking German. So he invites his family to Germany, and he's now speaking eloquently in German, and his family's like, what just happened here? So just replacing one activity. And he's got a myriad of other examples. And so each one of these talks that I think are great have impacted me in some way. Like as a result of that Stephen one, I end up creating my own list of things that maybe I need to do differently. And if you've done your job well, then it incites in the other person that, well, maybe I should do that too, right?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So, what do you do? Obviously, as an entrepreneur and a owner of your own business type thing, we're always busy, right? And many times it's like 24/7. Where do you find the balance, and how do you create the balance in your life?
Well, I don't think balance exists, Mario. You talk to entrepreneurs all the time, and I don't know if that's a theme that
Yeah.
emerges for you, but I don't
Yeah.
I think there are times when you can arrive in a balance. I do try to take some time off. I do recognize the power of really unplugging. So that's important to get kind of a clean slate. But I've got a supportive partner, which I think is important. That helps kind of run the household ship, if you will. And I think if anything, it's about being present. So my mom always said to me, when you're in the room, be in the room.
Yeah.
Which means whatever you're doing at this time, be there, and don't try to be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
So it's about being where you are and not being anxious about what's to come.
Yeah. Also, and being there, we see, in so many, like relationships and interactivity that we have, we're seeing like people being distracted. You go to a restaurant and people are on their phones, right? Instead of eating and talking to each other, or just different things like that distract us. Is it difficult because of all that today to be present?
Totally. Don't you think?
I think so.
I think, in my career, I didn't have a smartphone. I didn't even have a cell phone until I was 30, right?
Yeah.
And I resisted that. I don't want a cell phone. I don't want to be, everybody being able to call me at any given point. And I think there's a real discipline around putting that thing away such that you can give your head a break. So I don't look at the phone first thing in the morning. I make that a practice that we're not, if someone really needs to get a hold of me, they can find me. But for that first hour, we're not looking at that device. And then I am very good at putting it away in the evening as well.
Uh-huh.
So I think carving out, time to think is really crucial as an entrepreneur that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. Like, I'll often block my calendar to read, or to watch a TED Talk, or to sit down with pen and paper and just doodle, right? Like, it's creating that space to think is where you get ideas and where creativity is nurtured. And creativity for me is critical. And that's one of the reasons that we just talked about why I left the corporate world is I couldn't be creative there. Wow. So baking in that time, I think, would be my only advice, I guess, is to take time to think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough.
What have you found with entrepreneurs and
the same thing? Same thing. They're always, when you answer the question about the balance, I've heard that a lot, from entrepreneurs. But the thing too, I think is important is that we need to take the time away from things, not only just to relax, but I find the same thing for myself. Like I try to get out every day to go for a walk, right? And it's when I'm walking is that all these things pop into my head. When I'm away from this and this, the screen, et cetera, and just out of the blue, boom, things pop into my head. I just came back from a holiday and did a lot of walking there and sort of rural Saskatchewan, and tons of stuff just popping in my head, right? And I think that's I think you have to empty your mind, I guess, to have things come in. Because your mind's overflowing with stuff, nothing's going to come in, right?
Yeah, I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to go to a friend's cabin, and it's off the grid. Like no cell service, landline, right? And if that phone rings, you're like, what's happening? Right? So that was an interesting exercise in understanding our addiction to all things connected to Wi-Fi, where I couldn't even check if I wanted to.
Yeah.
So there's a period of, oh, this feels deeply uncomfortable. And then you find yourself in this pattern of, well, I don't know if I want to go back yet. I kind of like this space of nothingness.
Oh, I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. I try to do that every so often just to recharge, and you find if you don't rest and don't unplug in many ways, whether it's from technology or work, I think you that's a fine recipe for burning out and being not productive as you could be. Right.
I don't know about you. I've burnt out a couple of times in my career. It's not a lot of fun, and it takes a lot to come back from that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So if you can be preventative, I think that's the real message.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much, Carolyn, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. That was Carolyn Berglund, who is principal of Talk Talk. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's Podcasts, today with Calgary's podcast. Thanks for joining us.